Hi, everybody. This is Mrs. Kime, and today we are going to preview Scott Westerfeld's book, Uglies. This is such an awesome book. It is about a dystopian society in the future where everybody at a certain age has to get plastic surgery because society believes that if everyone is beautiful, then there won't be any more fighting or wars or anything else. It's the first in a series of 4 books. Uglies, Pretties, Specials, and Extras. So let's get on and read the first bit of it. Go through. New Pretty Town. The early summer sky was the color of cat vomit. Of course, Tally thought. You'd have to feed your cat only salmon-flavored cat food for a while to get the pinks right. The scudding clouds did look a bit fishy, rippled into scales by a high-altitude wind. As the light faded, deep blue gaps of night peered through like an upside-down ocean, bottomless and cold. Any other summer, a sunset like this would have been beautiful. But nothing had been beautiful since Paris turned pretty. Losing your best friend sucks, even if it's only 3 months and 2 days. Tally Youngblood was waiting for darkness. She could see New Pretty Town through her open window. The party towers were already lit up, and snakes of burning torches marked flickering pathways through the pleasure gardens. A few hot air balloons pulled at their tethers against the darkening pink sky, their passengers shooting safety fireworks at other balloons and passing parasailers. Laughter and music skipped across the water like rocks thrown with just the right spin, their edges just as sharp against Tally's nerves. Around the outskirts of the city, cut off from town by the black oval of the river, everything was in darkness. Everyone ugly was in bed by now. Tally took off her interface ring and said, "Good night." "Sweet dreams, Tally," said the room. She chewed up a toothbrush pill, punched her pillows, and shoved an old portable heater, one that produced about as much warmth as a sleeping Tally-sized human being, under the covers. Then she crawled out the window. Outside, with the night finally turning coal black above her head, Tally instantly felt better. Maybe this was a stupid plan, but anything was better than another night awake in bed feeling sorry for herself. On the familiar leafy path down to the water's edge, it was easy to imagine Paris stealing silently behind her, stifling laughter, ready for a night of spying on the new pretties. Together. She and Paris had figured out how to trick the house minder back when they were 12, when the 3-month difference in their ages seemed like it would never matter. "Best friends for life," Tally muttered, fingering the tiny scar on her right palm. The water glistened through the trees, and she could hear the wavelets of a passing river skimmer's wake slapping at the shore. She ducked, hiding in the reeds. Summer was always the best time for spying expeditions. The grass was high, it was never cold, and you didn't have to stay awake through the next school day. Of course, Paris could sleep as late as he wanted now. Just one of the advantages of being pretty. The old bridge stretched massively across the water, its huge iron frame as black as the sky. It had been built so long ago that it held up its own weight, without any support from hover struts. A million years from now, when the rest of the city had crumbled, the bridge would probably remain like a fossilized bone. Unlike the other bridges into New Pretty Town, the old bridge couldn't talk, or report trespassers, more importantly. But even silent, the bridge had always seemed very wise to Tally, as quietly knowing as some ancient tree. Her eyes were fully adjusted to the darkness now, and it took only seconds to find the fishing line tied to its usual rock. She yanked it and heard the splash of the rope tumbling from where it had hidden among the bridge supports. She kept pulling until the invisible fishing line turned into wet, knotted cord. The other end was still tied to the iron framework of the bridge. Tally pulled the rope taut and lashed it to the usual tree. She had to duck into the grass once more as another river skimmer passed. The people dancing on its deck didn't spot the rope stretched from bridge to shore. They never did. New pretties were always having too much fun to notice the little things out of place. When the skimmer's lights had faded, Tally tested the rope with her whole weight. One time, it had pulled loose from the tree, and both she and Paris had swung downward, then up and out over the middle of the river before falling off, tumbling into the cold water. She smiled at the memory, realizing she would rather be on that expedition, soaking wet in the cold with Paris, than dry and warm tonight, but alone. Hanging upside down, hands and knees clutching the knots along the rope, Tally pulled herself up into the dark framework of the bridge, then stole through its iron skeleton and across to New Pretty Town. She knew where Paris lived from the one message he had bothered to send since turning pretty. Paris hadn't given an address, but Tally knew the trick for decoding the random-looking numbers at the bottom of a ping. They led to some place called Garbo Mansion in the hilly part of town. Getting there was going to be tricky. In their expeditions, Tally and Paris had always stuck to the waterfront, where vegetation and the dark backdrop of Uglyville made it easy to hide. But now Tally was headed into the center of the island, where floats and revelers populated the bright streets all night. Brand new pretties like Paris always lived where the fun was most frantic. Tally had memorized the map, but if she made one wrong turn, she was toast. Without her interface ring, she was invisible to vehicles. They just run her down like she was nothing. I mean, of course, Tally was nothing here. Worse, she was ugly. But she hoped Paris wouldn't see it that way, wouldn't see her that way. Tally had no idea what would happen if she got caught. This wasn't like being busted for forgetting her ring or skipping classes or tricking the house into playing her music louder than allowed. Everyone did that kind of stuff, and everyone got busted for it. But she and Paris had always been very careful about not getting caught on these expeditions. Crossing the river was serious business. It was too late to worry now, though. What could they do to her anyway? In 3 months, she'd be a pretty herself. Tally crept along the river until she reached a pleasure garden and slipped into the darkness beneath a row of weeping willows. Under their cover, she made her way alongside a path lit by little guttering flames. A pretty couple wandered down the path. Tally froze, but they were clueless, too busy staring into each other's eyes to see her crouching in the darkness. Tally silently watched them passing, getting that warm feeling she always got from looking at a pretty face. Even when she and Paris used to spy on them from the shadows, giggling at all the stupid things the pretties said and did, they couldn't resist staring. There was something magic in their large and perfect eyes, something that made you want to pay attention to whatever they said, to protect them from any danger, to make them happy. They were so pretty. The two disappeared around the next bend, and Tally shook her head to clear the mushy thoughts away. She wasn't here to gawk. She was an infiltrator, a sneak, and ugly. She had a mission. The garden stretched up into town, winding like a black river through the bright party towers and houses. After a few more minutes of creeping, she startled a couple hidden among the trees. I mean, it was a pleasure garden after all. But in the darkness, they couldn't see her face, and only teased her as she mumbled an apology and slipped away. She hadn't seen too much of them either, just a tangle of perfect legs and arms. Finally, the garden ended, a few blocks from where Paris lived. Tally peered out from behind a curtain of hanging vines. This was farther than she and Paris had ever been together, and as far as her planning had taken her. There was no way to hide herself in the busy, well-lit streets. She put her fingers up to her face, felt the wide nose and thin lips, the too-high forehead and tangled mass of frizzy hair. One step out of the underbrush and she'd be spotted. Her face seemed to burn as the light touched it. What was she doing here? She should be back in the darkness of Uglyville, awaiting her turn. But she had to see Paris, had to talk to him. She wasn't quite sure why exactly, except that she was sick of imagining 1,000 conversations with him every night before she fell asleep. They'd spent every day together since they were littlies, and now, nothing. I mean, maybe if they could just talk for a few minutes, her brain would stop talking to imaginary Paris. 3 minutes might be enough to hold her for 3 months. Tally looked up and down the street, checking for side yards to slink through, dark doorways to hide in. She felt like a rock climber facing a sheer cliff, searching for cracks and handholds. The traffic began to clear a little, and she waited, rubbing the scar on her right palm. Finally, Tally sighed and whispered, "Best friends forever," and took a step forward into the light. An explosion of sound came from her right, and she leapt back into the darkness, stumbling among the vines, coming down hard on her knees in the soft earth, certain for a few seconds that she'd been caught. But the cacophony organized itself into a throbbing rhythm. It was a drum machine making its lumbering way down the street. Wide as a house, it shimmered with the movement of its dozens of mechanical arms, bashing away at every size of drum. Behind it trailed a growing bunch of revelers, dancing along with the beat, drinking and throwing their empty bottles to shatter against the huge, impervious machine. Tally smiled. The revelers were wearing masks. The machine was lobbing the masks out the back, trying to coax more followers into the impromptu parade. Devil faces and horrible clowns, monsters and gray aliens with big oval eyes, cats and dogs and cows, faces with crooked smiles or huge noses. The procession passed slowly, and Tally pulled herself back into the vegetation. A few of the revelers passed close enough that this sickly sweetness from their bottles filled her nose. A minute later, when the machine had trundled half a block farther, Tally jumped out and snatched up a discarded mask from the street. The plastic was soft in her hand, still warm from having been stamped into shape inside the machine a few seconds before. Before she pressed it against her face, Tally realized that it was the same color as the cat vomit pink of the sunset, with a long snout and two little pink ears. Smart adhesive flexed against her skin as the mask settled onto her face. Tally pushed her way through the drunken dancers, out the other side of the procession, and ran down a side street towards Garbo Mansion, wearing the face of a pig. Best friends forever. Garbo Mansion was fat, bright, and loud. It filled the space between a pair of party towers, a squat teapot between two slender glasses of champagne. Each of the towers rested on a single column no wider than an elevator. Higher up, they swelled to 5 stories of circular balconies, crowded with new pretties. Tally climbed the hill toward the trio of buildings, trying to take in the view through the eye holes of her mask. Someone jumped or was thrown from one of the towers, screaming and flailing his arms. Tally gulped, forcing herself to watch all the way down until the guy was caught by his bungee jacket a few seconds before splatting. He hover bounced in the harness a few times, laughing, before being deposited softly on the ground, close enough to Tally that she could hear nervous hiccups breaking up his giggles. He'd been as scared as Tally. She shivered, though jumping was hardly any more dangerous than standing here beneath the looming towers. The bungee jacket used the same lifters as the hover struts that held the spindly structures up. If all the pretty toys somehow stopped working, just about everything in New Pretty Town would come tumbling down. The mansion was full of brand new pretties. The worst kind, Paris used to always say. They lived like Uglies, 100 or so together in a big dorm, but this dorm didn't have any rules. Unless the rules were act stupid, have fun, and make noise. A bunch of girls in ball gowns were on the roof, screaming at the top of their lungs, balancing on the edge and shooting safety fireworks at people on the ground. A ball of orange flame bounced next to Tally, cool as an autumn wind, driving away the darkness around her. "Hey, there's a pig down there!" someone screamed from above. They all laughed, and Tally quickened her stride toward the wide-open door of the mansion. She pushed inside, ignoring the surprised looks of 2 pretties on their way out. It was all one big party, just like they always promised it would be. People were dressed up tonight in gowns and in black suits with long coat tails. Everyone seemed to find her pig mask pretty funny. They pointed and laughed, and Tally kept moving, not giving them time to do anything else. Of course, everyone was always laughing here. Unlike an ugly party, there'd never be any fights or even arguments. She pushed from room to room, trying to distinguish faces without being distracted by those big, pretty eyes, or overwhelmed by the feeling that she didn't belong. Tally felt uglier every second she spent there. Being laughed at by everyone she met wasn't helping much, but it was better than what they'd do if they saw her real face. Tally wondered if she would even recognize Paris. She'd only seen him once since the operation, and that was coming out of the hospital before the swelling had subsided. But she knew his face so well. Despite what Paris used to always say, pretties didn't really all look exactly the same. On their expeditions, she and Paris had sometimes spotted pretties who looked familiar, like uglies that they had known. Sort of like a brother or sister, like an older, more confident, much prettier brother or sister. One you'd be jealous of your whole life if you'd been born 100 years ago. Paris couldn't have changed that much. Have you seen the piggy? The what? There's a piggy on the loose. The giggling voices from the floor below. Tally paused and listened. She was all alone here on the stairs. Apparently pretties preferred the elevators. How dare she come to our party dressed like a piggy? This is white tie. She's got the wrong party. She's got no manners looking that way. Tally swallowed. The mask wasn't much better than her own face. The joke was wearing thin. She bounded up the stairs, leaving the voices behind. Maybe they'd forget about her if she just kept moving. There were only 2 more floors of Garbo Mansion to go, and then the roof. Paris had to be here somewhere. Unless he was out on the back lawn, or up in a balloon, or a party tower, or in a pleasure garden somewhere with someone. Well, Tally shook away that last image and ran down the hall, ignoring the same jokes about her mask, risking glances into rooms one by one. Nothing but surprised looks and pointed fingers and pretty faces. But none of them rang a bell. Paris wasn't anywhere. Here, Piggy! Hey, there she is! Tally bolted up to the top floor, taking two stairs at a time. Her hard breathing had heated up inside of the mask, her forehead sweating, the adhesive crawling as it tried to stay attached. They were following her now, a group of them, laughing and stumbling over one another up the stairs. There wasn't any time to search this floor. Tally glanced up and down the hall. No one up here anyway. The doors were all closed. Maybe a few pretties were actually getting their beauty sleep. If she went up to the roof to check for Paris, she'd be trapped. Here, Piggy! Time to run. Tally dashed toward the elevator, skidding to a halt inside. Ground floor, she ordered. She waited, peering down the hall anxiously, panting into the hot plastic of her mask. Ground floor, she repeated. Closed door. Nothing happened. She sighed, closing her eyes. Without an interface ring, she was nobody. The elevator wouldn't listen. Tally knew how to trick an elevator, but it took time and a penknife. She had neither. The first of her pursuers emerged from the stairway, stumbling into the hall. She threw herself backward against the elevator's sidewall, standing on tiptoe and trying to flatten herself so they couldn't see her. More came up, huffing and puffing like typical out-of-shape pretties. Tally could watch them in the mirror at the back of the elevator, which meant they could also see her if they thought to look this way. Where'd the piggy go? Here, Piggy. The roof, maybe? Someone stepped quietly into the elevator, looking back at the search party in bemusement. When he saw her, he jumped. Oh, goodness, you scared me. He blinked his long lashes, regarding her masked face, and looked down at his tailcoat. Oh, dear. Wasn't this party white tie? Tally caught her breath, and her mouth went dry. Paris? She whispered. He looked closely at her. Do I? She started to reach out, but remembered to press back flat against the wall. Her muscles were screaming from standing on tiptoe. It's me, Paris. Here, Piggy! He turned toward the voice down the hall, raised his eyebrows, and then looked at her. Close the door. Hold, he said quickly. The door slid shut, and Tally stumbled forward. She pulled off her mask to see him better. It was Paris. His voice, his brown eyes, the way his forehead crinkled when he was confused. But he was so pretty now. At school, they explained how it affected you. It didn't matter if you knew about evolution or not. It worked anyway, on everyone. There was a certain kind of beauty, a prettiness that everyone could see. Big eyes and full lips like a kid's, smooth, clear skin, symmetrical features, and 1,000 other little clues. Somewhere in the backs of their minds, people were always looking for these markers. No one could help seeing them, no matter how they were brought up. 1,000,000 years of evolution had made it part of the human brain. The big eyes and lips said, I am young and vulnerable, I can't hurt you, and you want to protect me. And the rest said, I am healthy, I won't make you sick. And no matter how you felt about a pretty, there was a part of you that thought, if we had kids, they'd be healthy too. I want this pretty person. It was biology, they said at school. Like your heart beating. You couldn't help believing all these things. Not when you saw a face like this, a pretty face. A face like Paris's. It's me, Tally said. Paris took a step back, his eyebrows rising. He looked down at her clothes. Tally realized she was wearing her baggy black expedition outfit, muddy from crawling up ropes and through gardens, from falling among vines. Paris's suit was deep black velvet, his shirt, vest, and tie all glowing white. She pulled away. Oh, sorry, I won't get you muddy. What are you doing here, Tally? She sputtered. Now that she was facing him, she didn't know what to say. All the imagined conversations had melted away into his big, sweet eyes. I had to know if we were still... Tally held out her right hand, the scarred palm facing up, sweaty dirt tracing the lines on it. Paris sighed. He wasn't looking at her hand or into her eyes, not into her squinty, narrow-set, indifferently brown eyes. Nobody eyes. Yeah, he said. But I mean, couldn't you have waited, Squint? Her ugly nickname sounded strange coming from a pretty. Of course, it would be even weirder to call him Nose, as she used to about 100 times a day. She swallowed. Why didn't you write me? Well, I tried, but it just felt bogus. I'm so different now. But where? She pointed at her scar. Take a look, Tally. He held down his own hand. The skin of his palm was smooth and unblemished. It was a hand that said, I don't have to work very hard, and I'm too clever to have accidents. The scar that they had made together was gone. They took it away. Of course they did, Squint. All my skin's new. Tally blinked. She hadn't thought of that. He shook his head. You're such a kid still. Elevator requested, said the elevator. Up or down? Tally jumped at the machine voice. Hold, please, Paris said calmly. Tally swallowed and closed her hand into a fist. But they didn't change your blood. We shared that, no matter what. Paris finally looked directly at her face, not flinching as she had feared he would. He smiled beautifully. No, they didn't. New skin, big deal. And in 3 months we can laugh about this. Unless what? She looked up into his big brown eyes, so full of concern. Just promise me that you won't do any more stupid tricks, Paris said. Like coming here? Something that'll get you into trouble? I want to see you pretty. Of course. So promise me. Paris was only 3 months older than Tally, but dropping her eyes to the floor, she felt like a Litley again. All right, I promise. Nothing stupid, and they won't catch me tonight either. Okay, get your mask, and his voice trailed off. She turned her gaze to where it had fallen. Discarded, the plastic mask had recycled itself, turning into pink dust, which the carpet in the elevator was already filtering away. The two stared at each other in silence. Elevator requested, the machine insisted. Up or down? Paris, I promise they won't catch me. No pretty can run as fast as me. Just take me down to the... Paris shook his head. Up, please. Roof. The elevator moved. Up? Paris, how am I going to? Straight out the door in a big rack. Bungee jackets. There's a whole bunch in case of a fire. You mean jump? Tally swallowed. Her stomach did a backflip as the elevator came to a halt. Paris shrugged. I do it all the time, Squint. He winked. You'll love it. His expression made his pretty face glow even more until he leaped forward to wrap her arms around him. He still felt the same, at least, maybe a bit taller and thinner, but he was still warm and solid and still Paris. Tully! She stumbled back as the doors opened. She'd left mud all over his white vest. Oh no, just go. His distress made Tally want to hug him again. She wanted to stay and clean Paris up, make sure he looked perfect for the party. She reached out a hand. Go. But we're best friends, right? He sighed, dabbing a brown stain. Sure, forever. In 3 months. She turned and ran, the doors closing behind her. At first, no one noticed her on the roof. They were all looking down. It was dark, except for the occasional flare of a safety sparkler. Tally found the rack of bungee jackets and pulled at one. It was clipped to the rack. Her fingers fumbled, looking for a clasp. She wished she had her interface ring to give her instructions. Then she saw the button. Press in case of fire. Oh, crap, she said. Her shadow jumped and jittered. 2 pretties were coming toward her, carrying sparklers. Who's that? What's she wearing? Hey, you! This party is white tie. Ew, look at her face. Oh, crap, Tally repeated and pressed the button. An ear-shattering siren split the air, and the bungee jacket seemed to jump from the rack into her hand. She slid into the harness, turning to face the 2 pretties. They leaped back as if she'd transformed into a werewolf. One dropped the sparkler, and it extinguished itself instantly. Fire drill, Tally said, and ran toward the edge of the roof. Once she had the jacket around her shoulders, the strap and zippers seemed to wind around her like snakes until the plastic was snug around her waist and thighs. A green light flashed on the collar, right where she couldn't help but see it. Good jacket, she said. It wasn't smart enough to answer, apparently. The pretties playing on the roof had all gone silent, were milling around, wondering if there really was a fire. They pointed out at her, and Tally heard the word ugly on their lips. What was worse in New Pretty Town, she wondered? Your mansion burning down, or an ugly crashing your party? Tally reached the edge of the roof, vaulted up onto the rail, and teetered for a moment. Below her, pretties were starting to spill out of Garbo Mansion onto the lawn and down the hill. They were looking back up, searching for smoke or flames. All they saw was her. It was a long way down, and Tally's stomach already seemed to be in freefall. But she was thrilled, too. The shrieking siren, the crowd gazing up at her, the lights of New Pretty Town all spread out below like a million candles. Tally took a deep breath and bent her knees, readying herself for jump. For a split second, she wondered if the jacket would work since she wasn't wearing an interface ring. Would it hover bounce for a nobody? Or would she just splat? But she had promised Paris she wouldn't get caught, and the jacket was for emergencies, and there was a green light on. Heads up! Tally shouted and jumped. And that's it for Uglies, Scott Westerfield, Chapter 1.